Hello everyone, Mrs. Horner here. I have been recording videos for a book we've been reading, and I've decided to record myself reading to you the first 3 chapters because I did not record the first 3 chapters because we actually read them in class. But for anybody else or any other class that wants to watch and listen to this book, I am going to record the first 3 chapters here. So the book is called My Survival, A Girl on Schindler's List. And it is about a little girl named Rena and her family and what happened to them during World War II. All right, so chapter 1 is called October 1944, Auschwitz Death Camp. It was bitter cold the night German police forced me and my mother into a cattle car and sent us from Plzew, Poland to Auschwitz, the largest of all Nazi killing centers. The train was made up of 2 cattle cars. There were 150 women prisoners crammed into each of the 2 cars. I was 14 years old, one of the youngest. We arrived at Auschwitz late at night. Guards slammed open the doors of the cattle car and yelled at us to jump out. Then they marched us into a long wooden barrack with rows of benches along the walls. "Take off all your clothes," the guards shouted. "You will be brought back here to collect your things later after you shower." The guards shoved us into a room maybe 20 feet by 20 feet. It was dark, but we could see pipes running the length of the ceiling. Back home in Krakow, we had heard scary rumors about what had happened to Jews in concentration camps. What kind of shower was this? Were we going to die? If you were not there in the death camp at Auschwitz, you cannot imagine it, and I cannot truly describe it. Still, for most of my adult life, I have been trying as best as I can to teach about the Holocaust in middle grade schools and colleges, in church groups and synagogues. Like many other survivors, I feel an obligation to tell my story again and again. The Holocaust was the scientifically designed, state-sponsored murder of the Jewish people by Nazi Germany and its allies. The Holocaust should never be forgotten and should never happen again. But how can we protect against that? You, dear reader, can help. One person with courage to stand up for the innocent can make a big difference. I should know. I'm alive thanks to someone who refused to stand by and do nothing. His name was Oskar Schindler. Chapter 2, 1930s, Another World. To understand the story you are about to read, it will help to know something about my childhood and where I came from. Please keep in mind that today I am 90 years old. These are the memories of a girl in her early teens, and some memories change over time. I cannot promise you that everything happened exactly as I am recalling. After so many years, some details may be less than perfect. What I can promise you is that everything I tell you is truthful and that these things did happen. I was born in 1929 in Krakow, Poland, Poland's historic capital city. Krakow was a center of the nation's artistic and cultural life. It had a famous university attended by students from around the world. Electric streetcars crisscrossed the city, bringing people to offices, museums, and libraries. I lived with my mother, Rosa, and my father, Moses, in one of Krakow's many apartment buildings. Our building was a few blocks from the center of the city and next door to a Franciscan monastery. There was a balcony off the stairway, landing below our 4th floor apartment. From the balcony, I could look into the monastery's backyard, where there were fruit trees and flowering bushes. In the early morning hours, monks walked slowly around the backyard in their long brown robes, praying on strands of wooden beads. My memories of early childhood are, for the most part, like that orchard, calm and pleasant. My parents' bedroom had a large wooden clothes closet. In the kitchen was an iron cook stove that burned coal. A Polish woman came once a week to clean, and on cold days she took a metal bucket, walked down 4 flights of marble stairs to the cellar, filled the bucket with coal, and carried it back upstairs. Heat from 3 coal-burning ovens warmed the whole apartment. I remember other details from my childhood. Our main language at home was Polish, but my mother had hired a tutor who taught me German. Because of all the later horrors that happened to me and my family at the hands of the Nazi Germany, once I came to America, I never wanted to hear German spoke ever again. My father was a good man, loving, attentive to me and my mother, and always looking to do good for others. He earned a living as a salesman for a company that made surgical instruments and hospital supplies. He left Krakow every Monday morning by train to visit out-of-town customers and returned on Friday in time for the start of the Sabbath. The Sabbath, the time between sunset on Friday and sunset on Saturday, has always been the most sacred part of the week for Jews. During those 24 hours, religious Jews dedicate their time to religious study and do not work. Even turning on a light switch is considered work and forbidden on the Sabbath. I was an only child, but my mother had 6 siblings and my father had 7. My mother's parents, Hannah and Isaac, had their own apartment around the corner from us. I had cousins who lived on the other side of the Vistula River, which flowed around the city, and my mother's siblings lived in Berlin, Germany, about 8 hours away by train. So as a child, I was surrounded by family. In summer, we all came together and rented a cottage in the village called Zawoja, near a famous mountain known as Baba Gura, or Baba Mountain, where we hiked, swam in freshwater streams, and picked juicy strawberries. There was an elderly woman who took care of us on summer days while my parents, aunts, and uncles were hiking up Baba Mountain. One time, when the grown-ups were out mountain climbing, the sky grew dark. A heavy rainstorm began, and thunder shook the windows. We kids weren't so scared, but the nanny was terrified and insisted we all kneel down and pray. It felt funny. What did a bunch of Jewish kids know about Christian prayers? But we did it anyway to make her happy. These days, when I'm invited to speak about my childhood, students often ask if I experienced anti-Semitism. Yes, I did. Many of our neighbors didn't bother hiding their hatred of Jews. Of course, each person who endured the Holocaust has particular memories, and conditions were different depending on where people grew up and how they were treated. In my case, growing up in Krakow, the anti-Semitism was obvious. You could see it in people's faces when they looked at you. Sometimes they did worse than just look, as I found out when I was 6 years old and starting school. Krakow had a large Jewish population. About 60,000 of the city's 200,000 residents were Jews. There was a private Jewish girls' school, but it was a few miles away from our building, and my parents didn't like the idea of me walking such a long distance alone. Instead, they sent me to a public school around the corner from our house. The school was so close that my mother could stand on the balcony of our apartment and watch me playing in our schoolyard to be sure I was safe. My first day in kindergarten, a few of us 5- and 6-year-olds were playing hopscotch in the schoolyard. Without warning, one of the girls picked up a stone and threw it at me. "Go home, you dirty Jew," she yelled. Did I hear her right? I was too shocked to say anything. That afternoon when school ended, I ran home and told my mother what had happened. "Why did that girl call me dirty?" I asked. "I'm not dirty. I took a shower just this morning." My mother told me some people called us dirty just because our religion was different from theirs and they didn't like us. That made no sense to me, but as a 6-year-old, what did I understand of the world? I loved everybody and was happy playing with the other girls in my school. Who cared which religion they belonged to? The next day, my mother took me by the hand and walked to the local library, where she looked for a book that might explain anti-Semitism. I don't remember if she found such a book, but I do remember her telling me, "In life, not everybody is going to like you, and you are not going to like everyone either, but that's no reason to hate them." My mother and father were friendly with the Polish woman who was superintendent of our building. She had 3 sons. My parents helped her sons find jobs, and out of appreciation, she invited us to join them for their Christmas holiday dinner. Still, that kind of friendship between Jews and non-Jews was rare. Our family went back many generations in Poland, and my parents were strongly patriotic. We loved our country. My mother's oldest brother, Zygmunt, had been a surgeon for the Polish army during the First World War. When he was killed on the battlefield, the army awarded him one of its most prestigious medals. I used to take Uncle Zygmunt's medal to school for show and tell. But having an uncle who was a war hero didn't matter to kids whose parents had taught them to hate Jews. and the Jewish students always had to be on the lookout for stone throwers. Sometime in the spring of 1938, when I was 9 years old, my Aunt Helen and my Uncle Benjamin and their 2 children, Rita and Jenny, visited us from Berlin. In the evening, the grown-ups waited until they thought the children were asleep, and they then whispered about Adolf Hitler, Germany's dictator, and the terrible things his Nazi party was doing to Jews. My aunt and uncle said they were afraid the Nazis would force them to give up their tailoring business and send them to a concentration camp. I had no idea what that meant. What was a concentration camp? Could any of this be true? It was so frightening, I did not sleep that night. All right, so those are the first 2 chapters, chapter 1 and chapter 2. I will stop the video here and then make another video for chapter 3. I hope you're enjoying the story so far.